All righty, we are live. And I want to welcome everybody who has joined us for our broadcast today. I'm Burton Maben with Creative Cyber Management. I'm joined today by Nicole Ledoux from Black Point Cyber and Najo Ifield with B-Sides New Orleans. And we're going to be discussing one of we're gonna try to stay on topic today, but I think what we're gonna really start with is the gorilla in the room, okay, which is or the elephant in the room, or whatever big impending animal you want to put in the room, but and that's the move it cybersecurity attack that that has hit across the federal sphere, but specifically in Oregon and specifically here in Louisiana. This is historically this is probably the largest cybersecurity attack that the state has ever seen, and the what's going to happen is that there's been 6 million records that have been dumped out onto the dark web through the Office of Motor Vehicles, and this this dump is going to have some implications going forward. And like I said, this could probably go forward for years as this information gets passed around, sold, tranched and on the dark web between criminal organizations. Um, but you know, I want to take a time right now to go ahead and let my guest today say, something about, what they're doing and what their organizations represent and how we're going to discuss this. So I will start with Najo. Go ahead, Najo.
Hey, thanks, Burton. Pleasure to be here. So, uh, my background in cyber extends back over the last 15 years and over 20 years in technology. And some days I wonder if we're making a difference at all. But I am inspired by the both of you, and thrilled to be a guest here to talk about what can we do. Um, and really, I think when we talk about breaches, and I'm continually frustrated by some of the basics that we don't seem to cover. So I know that we're going to get into that a little bit later, but that's really the heart of what I focus on: the people in the process in an organization, and what are we doing to support the security teams in their strategy and roadmap. So we're going to keep seeing these breaches. We're going to keep talking about it, but I'd like to hear from organizations that what they are actually doing to take steps to protect their critical assets.
Absolutely. And Nicole, go ahead, tell us about your role. Now, I will say Nicole is full disclosure, Black Point is one of my partners, and they do an excellent job. And Nicole is going to be representing them today. Go ahead, Nicole.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Burton. Yeah, like Nasia said, it's so wonderful to be here today and to talk to you guys about everything that we're going to be talking about. So I am with Blackpoint Cyber. I've been with the company for about 6 years now. We are a managed detection and response service. So we have a 24/7 security operations center. They're based in our office right outside of Baltimore, Maryland. Our CEO and founder, John, he came out of the NSA. He was kind of on the offensive side of things. So, he's really a part of the very, very small group of people at the NSA who is on the offensive side, really understands the hacker tradecraft, understands the methods that they use. And so we essentially built our own software and our own service around that specifically. And so, yeah, we are, on a daily basis helping SMBs, protect their environment against this exact type of thing, this move it attack that we're talking about here. So yeah, that's what cyber does, and yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and especially in this type of company. So thanks so much.
All righty. Well, one thing is that, and I was just this before we came live on air, I was talking about how this morning I was listening to NPR and they were interviewing a local state representative, and one of the callers into the show asked him about the breach, and his response was like, "Oh well, this it happens. You can't really do anything about it. So the Russians or whoever has our information." And it kind of struck me as being a little uneducated and cavalier in terms of what needs to be done and educating not only the general public, business owners, but also, politicians, that you really can't take this cavalier attitude concerning private information being traded on the dark web. Because, what's going to happen is that this information is pivoted and used for other attacks against small businesses, medium businesses, against individuals. And so, what we really should be talking about is how we're going to respond as we move into the future. I'm getting a little feedback on my end. You guys hear that? Nadra, you hear the feedback?
No, you sound great.
Okay, all right. I'm just wondering. Um, what's the first thing, Naja, would you say that that a business owner should be thinking about right now in terms of their data and how to protect their data?
So the conversation, needs to be had in terms of what are the third-party risk assessments? Do you understand the business processes with your vendors? Do you understand what they're doing with your data? Are they encrypting it? Where is it sitting? How are they accessing any of your information? And where is all of that documented? And is your security team aware of this? And if there's no security team, are you aware of that? Because the first time you're contacting your vendor, you don't want that to be in the middle of a breach or an incident. You want to have a path and a well-established relationship. What do you think, Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, back to Burton's point about, being so cavalier about it. Obviously we run up against this type of attitude pretty often in our organization and in our industry. And it is disheartening. And Naja, back to your point about you're always wondering, like, are we actually making a difference? And, every day when somebody does come to me and they're like, we know we need to be doing more, that feels like a win and it keeps me going. But there are still so many companies that they are just like happy to, fine, like our cyber insurance will pick up the pieces after we have a breach, we'll just pay the ransom, we'll get the data back, etc. And a lot of these companies just do not understand the implications of what really goes into these breaches. I mean, sure, maybe you can get your data back, but that's not going to save your data from being put out there for everyone to see, the reputation damage, all of that stuff. I mean, these hackers, it's a business that they're running. They're extremely motivated to make money on your data and, getting into your network. And, you might end up under a full double, triple extortion kind of situation. So there's so much more that goes into it than just, we can just recover from our backup or our insurance or what have you. So something that, we typically recommend for companies, because, I know and we know that it is very difficult to the cybersecurity industry is full of so many solutions, so many companies saying that they're going to help you. And you're like, how do I decide, like, what am I going to spend my money on? What are the tools that I actually need? So something that we typically recommend is to look at something like the NIST cybersecurity framework. It's very prescriptive. It's not as, I feel, it's not as objective as some of the other compliance frameworks. And, it breaks it down into pillars. These are pillars that you really need to make sure that you are filling. You need to make sure that you're identifying your assets. You need to know what you need to secure. You need to make sure that you are, putting preventative measures in place. So AV, firewalls, email security, that kind of thing. Then you need to make sure that you have tools in place, detection and response tools that are actually going to detect that tradecraft. So hackers, using your own tools against you, you need something that will detect that and then respond to it. So you need, 2:00 in the morning, you need somebody who's actually going to be taking a response for you, isolating a device, killing a process. Disabling your Microsoft 365 account if somebody was getting into your Microsoft account. And then you need the recovery part of it. So the cyber insurance, the backups, all of that stuff. So that's just, I think, a good framework to go off of. Sorry, I know I talked a lot there. I'll hand it back over to whomever or Nija.
Well, what I always tell clients and potential clients is that you have to start off by doing an assessment. If you haven't had a cybersecurity assessment on your business, if you're not doing an annual assessment, you need to sit down and go through a process of assessing what, exactly what is going on within the business. And a lot of times through the assessment process, we find tons and tons of holes, tons and tons of things that need to be addressed. And then it's the next part of that process is, okay, how are we going to mitigate or address these problems and in a way that is going to secure this organization? And a lot of times business owners, the first thing they want to know is, wow, how much is this going to cost me? And my answer is it's going to cost you like pennies on the dollar to fix something on the front end, and it's going to cost you a whole lot more on the back end after the breach. And when you become totally uninsurable after a couple of breaches, and you can't get any insurance, and you may have been breached for $500,000. The average breach in the United States for small and medium-sized businesses is about $250,000. So I don't know too many businesses that can take a $250,000 hit or a $500,000 hit on an annual basis and continue to stay in operation. So we have to talk about the money side. We have to talk about what's the cost of fixing versus the cost of the risk of taking a huge hit. And for pennies on the dollar, you can protect your organization moving forward. But a lot of times it starts with governance and policy. It starts with taking a look at those policies and then applying technologies that to the policy to make sure that you can audit what's going on. And so and Naja, you've had a lot of experience with this, so I'm going to turn this back over to you.
So you're right. Getting into the governance, risk, and compliance, and how are you managing all of that information? Is it on scratches of paper or managing spreadsheets? I mean, there are tools out there that will automate all of these processes for you. And are you continuously monitoring what's happening in the environment too? So back to your comments, both Bert and Nicole, is what's really going on in the environment and what do you actually have in your plan? And building against a framework is so valuable because you have checklists of things to do and to validate, and you can continuously update that. Like Bert, you said, do you even do that? Or if you're only doing it once a year, what happens in that whole year can be astonishing. So let's get back to the people and the process, building that framework against and continuously update, check, monitor, and do that over again. That would be my advice.
And I guess my next question, and this I'm going to send this off to you, Neju, is how do we develop that culture with with our vendors? So here in South Louisiana, we're dependent on the oil and gas industry, and a lot of companies are part of that supply chain. But as you've seen, one vendor within the chain can cause a ripple effect on a breach. So, what would you say about having conversations about this to kind of build a culture of security, just not within any single organization, but the organization and their vendors? Now, I mean, I have an idea. I don't want to jump in and say what my idea is first. I would like to hear, your thoughts on the process.
So I think sometimes in the cybersecurity community, we do ourselves a disservice. So we're really awesome at talking to one another about what's going on and we're all up to date and we've got this network, but do we actually go and build relationships within the business? Do the business leaders actually understand what's happening in their organization? I know some business leaders will ask the team, are we good? And then team gives a thumbs up, and that isn't an answer. And I know that security people talking to business leaders can sometimes be scary. And I always advise security leaders and team members, take some business classes, or just, read online, read the annual general report, understand what your business really does, because hate to say it, you're a cost center. You cost the business money. So you need to help them understand why security is important, what's at risk. And that's, you talked, Bert, about the risk assessment, identifying those high value assets within the organization, and say to the business leader, like, if we didn't have access to this, what would it happen? You mentioned energy companies. What happens if that asset isn't available? Would we lose millions of dollars? And so creating that culture of security, I think, starts within the security team as part of awareness training, but not just a once a year we click the thing and we check the box, but actually talking about it. This breach, let's go to the leadership team and ask for 5 minutes of their time and talk about what this breach means. And maybe it didn't affect their organization, but who could it be affecting? And is it possible? And so security people, we just need to get out and make friends, take people for coffee, people that we don't work with on a day-to-day basis, but are part of the overall organization. That's just that communication piece that's critical.
Absolutely. That was a great answer. I think that I would add to that, at some point, companies have to write this into their electronic use policies and their policies, that vendors have to have a certain level of compliance, especially when they're using, particular software systems, and that, you have to have some controls that are set up within the business to lock out software applications that may be at risk, or you've identified them as being at risk. Now I'm going to pivot back over to Nicole on this, because you guys have just rolled out a product that's within your security operations center that exactly does that identifies at-risk applications, and you're able to freeze and lock out those applications in order for a mitigation process to take place if we find out that there's a problem with that application. And so you may want to go ahead and speak to that, Nicole.
Yeah. So I totally agree with everything that was said about communication and making sure that the organization is on the same page about, hey, what is our plan? What does this actually mean? When you take these trainings, you do these phishing courses or whatever, what is this actually a part of? Like, what is the actual process that we have in place? And also having these conversations with vendors. I think all of that is so important and definitely one of the first steps. But with all of that being said, I work for a managed detection and response company. Our whole kind of mindset is that, even if you have all the communication, even if you have all of the fancy firewalls and stuff like that, we assume that we're still going to be breached. We assume that somehow some vendor is still going to be using a tool that is commonly used by hackers, and that hacker is going to use it to, they're going to find a way in. So definitely all of that is still important, but obviously having the tools in place for catching those fringe cases is still extremely important. Hackers only have to be lucky one time, and us as defenders, we have to be lucky 100% of the time, which is obviously very difficult. So, as an MDR company, we're very focused on the endpoint. We want to make sure that we are constantly monitoring how devices are communicating with each other, the privileged access that people have, that kind of thing. But back to what Burton was talking about. So we rolled out a product. It's called Managed Application Control. And, we feel here at Blackpoint that having zero trust of some kind is an important piece. We don't necessarily feel as though you have to necessarily be blocking everything. People need to be able to do their jobs. But we should at least be blocking the applications and the tools that we know are commonly used by hackers. And the whole MOVEit vulnerability situation, I'm sure that our threat intel team is taking that into account, and we're going to be we're constantly updating this, basically curated list of applications and tools that we know, hackers are using. Your end users or your employees, for the most part, shouldn't really be using these things. There might be times where they do need to use these things, but we have a curated list of all of these tools. We can block them basically outright. There can be whitelists put in place, of course, for certain tools. If you are doing a pen test and you want to make sure that you can do that, you can put a whitelist in place for that. But pen testing tools, RMM tools, Screen Connect, all those types of things. These are things that hackers are using. I mean, we see it all the time. We've seen kind of the same stuff for the last, I don't know how long, 10 years. And so we know the tools that we're using. We know the tools we need to be blocking. So that's definitely a good piece of kind of that whole framework, is making sure that you are blocking those things. So yeah, hopefully that provided enough detail on that. But
on the application development side, there's a real struggle here, because as a security professional, we're sort of at odds with what application developers do. Application developers develop something that they want to get out on the market because they have to recover their cost. And even though there's a process during the development process to check for vulnerabilities in the application, once that application is out on the market, there really isn't a lot of incentives for them to go back and do penetration tests against their own applications once it's been out there, unless there's a discovery of a vulnerability, then they'll go back and patch the vulnerability on the back end. And we're not talking about the big guys. We're talking about industrial applications and regular, like MOVEit, these types of applications that are sold to different businesses to help them with their processes. So I think we're going to start having discussions where industry leaders are going to have to say, listen, if you want us to use your products, you're going to have some type of certification that this has been tested within a certain amount of time, have a testing period, and these tests are updated annually, just like the financial services industry has to go through, or the HIPAA compliance has to go through. But this is not statutory right now, so there's no who wants to do it unless the government says, hey, this is statutory. Who's going to do penetration testing of their software product?
It's really alarming, like how many times we've looked at maybe purchasing a security product, and we've done some digging into it. Our engineers have really taken it apart and found really glaring, issues with these products. And they're supposed to be security products, and obviously I'm not going to name names, but it's scary. Yeah.
Right. It is, and a lot of times, I was talking to a young man last night, who, and he's an educator, and he wants to come into this industry. And he says, well, I've been taking all these classes, and I've been learning my technology and so on and so forth. And I said to him, I said, listen, you're an educator. Your ability to communicate is more, your ability to communicate things to business people and to talk to folks is just as important, if not more important, as you being able to write a script in Python. Okay, you can right now AI can write your Python scripts, but AI can't sit down and have a one-to-one with a business owner and really kind of talk to them about what risk versus rewards, and have that hard discussion on risk versus rewards. And Najo, I know you've had this discussion many times, and when last time we were together, you were telling me about some of your frustrations in that area, especially when you walk into a C-suite or a conference room, and you have all these different individuals sort of competing for a process. It's tough getting stakeholders around the table and getting everybody on the same page. What's your magic formula?
Oh, well, I don't know that I haven't figured it out. So if anybody can let me know what that is, I'd appreciate that. Because as Nicole, as you were talking about applications that you come across, I think I've seen, businesses, depending on what the business is, there's a part of the business that needs this very particular application. And the security team looks at it and they're like, no way. But someone on the leadership team says, we're going to do this. And security leaders need to say, all right, you're going to sign this as a sign off that says you accept the risk for this. And I've seen a lot of arms get very short when they start to understand what the impact could be to the business. So I think it's back to that whole education. No one on a leadership team wants to look like they don't know everything. Your job is to make them, give them enough information that they can make those decisions. And it always comes down to the dollars. So if you're asking for money for projects or programs, you need to have, and best if you can quantify the risks and give them dollar values of, like you said earlier, Bert, if we spend this now, it's likely not going to cost us $250,000 after the fact. And you're still going to find business leaders that accept the risk and they're okay with that. And, risk is built in, they have chief risk officers that have built in the financial model to this, which some of that still scares me. But, walking into that room and as the, educator, if you can think of yourself as that way, also the mediator and helping, and language translator between what the security teams are trying to accomplish, what the business is trying to do, and then finding some common ground. But there's definitely no magic secret to that. It's just the, being very, very well aware of all of the components that need to come together and being able to speak to that leadership team about why it should matter to them. And I'll use an example of a breach a couple of years ago, and the executive on camera saying, we've got security to a T, and I don't even know what that means. And, my job is to make sure that if there is a necessary media presence required, that we're educating those business leaders about how to be humble and talk about what happened in their environment and to ensure that that's not going to happen to the next business. So I sort of feel like a cyber professionals, we have a responsibility to educate those leaders. I know that's a long-winded answer, but I don't have any magic. Sorry.
No, that was an excellent answer. That's an excellent answer because that's actually the reality, and for a lot of young folks who want to jump in to this field and want to become part of this field, that's something eventually they're going to run into, and they have to be prepared to sort of help manage that process one way or the other. And there's going to be, I think, as we move forward, there's going to be a lot more discussion on cost benefit analysis and how this ties into decision making process, because I'm old enough to remember that the cybersecurity industry was a very sleepy industry until 2013, and in 2013, you had the Target hit that affected all of Target's credit card holders. Anybody doing business. I was one of those folks affected, and that was the wake up call across major industries, because at that point the CEO gets fired, the board shakes up the management team, because the embarrassment, the public embarrassment to the company itself. And I always come back to that. There's other examples, but I always come back to that example saying, okay, they're real life, when the data is exposed, when you have a major breach, yeah, people lose their jobs, heads roll, There are consequences, and you know, how are you ready to, as a business owner, as a board member, are you ready to deal with these consequences? It's, you know, an ounce of prevention could keep that from happening. So anyway, I am. This is where I do my plug. You know, for I'm going to see if I can put this up here. This is where I do my. Oh, there we go. All right, so this is where I do my plug. This is my plug for folks who want to sign up for a complimentary assessment of their business. You can follow this link, and I will post it again in a few minutes. You can write this down, take a picture of it with your camera, follow this link, get the information. We will schedule you for a complimentary assessment of your business. We follow a structure for assessing the business that is parallel to the same assessment process that CISA does, and we try to figure out where you are on the cyber maturity, model, where you stand, and then we give you a rating A, B, C, D, or not so good. So that's where we are with that. And then as we move on, my last question today, ladies, is do you think zero trust, or getting people to go into a zero trust, is zero trust the answer? I mean, is really, trying to talk businesses into becoming zero trust? Is this the answer that we should be moving forward? This is something that's discussed within the industry, but I've rarely have ever seen it actually used in real businesses. And I'm going to start with you, Nejo.
Well, I don't know if John Kindervag is watching, but he was the creator of Zero Trust. And if you've ever had the pleasure of meeting him or reading any of his work or following him, he's fantastic. And so he's been talking about this. I don't even know how long. Has it been 10 years? I'm not even sure. So, I mean, this is one way of locking down systems, but then we're also looking, does the organization do basic things like multi-factor authentication? I've got so many questions. So zero trust is an approach. I don't know that it's a one approach fits everyone. What do you think, Nicole?
Yeah, I would agree. Like I mentioned before, I think zero trust is definitely something that is important to consider, and done in the right way, it can absolutely provide value to your security posture, but it is definitely not the only thing. It's definitely not the silver bullet. It's not it's not going to solve all of your problems. And in some cases, it might create some overhead for the team, or, just kind of some organizational issues or operational issues, especially for companies that have a lot of operations that are in place. So it's definitely depends on the organization and what you guys have in place, and et cetera. But I think there are so many different things that you need to consider when it comes to security, and zero trust is not the only thing, for sure. But it does have its place, and if done well, and if done in a way that's not going to super interrupt your operations, then yes, it is a very good tool to have and use.
All right, that's good. When I think about zero trust, I sort of think about defense in depth, but my main way that I focus on zero trust is that you've already been breached. You just don't know it yet. So let's start from assumption of breach. And that's kind of hard that's a hard sell for people. That's a hard sell. I think getting everybody into the mindset of best practices is an easier way to go. Okay. And then if you want to take, some zero trust, if you want to wrap some zero trust policies into that, you can. But a lot of times when I'm talking to someone, it's like, let's get on best practices. Let's take a look at best practices. MFA definitely is a best practice. Okay, good governance, good controls, MS 365 hardening,
Restricted access.
restricted access. These are all good ways to start. I mean, there's a lot of places. There are a lot of places that you can start where you can kind of plug holes, and as you plug holes, you take away. What you want to do is you want to take away the surface area for attacks as much as possible, and make that surface area as small as possible. And then it's and then you have to monitor it. That's the main thing. How we're gonna monitor it. And so that's a lot of times business people they don't know what best practices are, and it's our job to go in and teach them best practices, and that's that's going to be our next conversation, by the way. So as we move forward, I think we had a really great show today, and there's so much on our topic list. Would you guys mind coming back in the future and being with me again on a live show?
No, I'd love it. Like, I'm just, while you're talking, I'm like, I want to talk about shiny object syndrome. And a friend of mine coined that, Rebecca Moore. And when I'm thinking about, you're talking about best practices, but then what do you do when a team goes on a shopping spree and they buy all these things because it's fun and it's cool and it's neat to be in the environment? But you're like, I live in New Orleans, right? When you talk about reducing the attack surface, so I have iron doors, and I have make sure that I don't have the fanciest car on the street and things like that. So I'm reducing my attack surface. We're talking about reducing the attack surface, but your clients are out there buying all sorts of like skylights and chandeliers and new Teslas and making themselves a perfect target. So yeah, I've got all sorts of ideas of things we could talk on for future. I'd love the opportunity.
Because this is going to be an ongoing conversation. I think what I'm going to have to do is make this into a series, and you guys have been wonderful guests. And what we're going to do is we'll have this recording available. It's going to be up on YouTube later this afternoon, and we can share it with who we need to share it with, and so on and so forth. Because we have to kind of keep this conversation going. I think next week, when I come back to LinkedIn Live, we're going to be having a bigger discussion about the movement and what companies can do once they've been breached. How do they manage a breach from a public relations standpoint? Because this breach has been really poorly managed by the state in terms of public relations, telling people, hey, they really haven't spoken at all to business owners, and they've only sent out information to residents saying, hey, lock up your credit, call your credit bureau. That is, that's good, but what about all these businesses that run their have information with the OMB, and what are they supposed to do now? So it's really been poor. And I think we're going to have to address that in a future conversation. But listen, guys, thanks a lot today. Any last thoughts?
Talk to Burton about your security standing.
And I will give a shout out to the FBI because I thought their advisory. I know, Bert, I share your interest in going further, but I think at a basic. Watching what the FBI produces and releases. So, credit to them for that advisory after MOVE-IT.
Right. Oh yeah. Now the FBI did have excellent advisory that came out, and getting people to read a 30-page advisory. It's a 30-page advisory, but it's really meant for security teams. It's really meant for security teams, and then consultants such as myself. We're left with taking that information, distilling it, and talking to small business owners about this is what you need to do, because a lot of times they don't have security teams. They may have an MSP. They may have someone in office handling this, but whether or not they're going to take a read through the FBI report is that's iffy. So yep, that's where we are. And then once again, it's communicating and talking, and like you said, Najo, sitting down and having that cup of coffee with people you usually don't have it with. That's important. Well, listen, guys, thanks a lot. I'm going to end this broadcast. I want to thank everybody who showed up, and we will be having this broadcast on a rebroadcast that we'll send out to everyone. Okay?
Thank you so much for having us.
And I will look forward to having you guys in the future.
My pleasure.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.